Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Cybersecurity series with me, Chirag Joshi. On this show, we've covered unique perspectives from leaders across the world on key areas in cybersecurity that are typically not found in your traditional cybersecurity manuals and textbooks. And these areas are focused on entrepreneurship, on career growth, on different ways of approaching strategy, mindset, journalism, law. So I've been very fortunate to have all these different perspectives that contribute to becoming an exceptional cybersecurity professional and staying at that level because the world, as we know, keeps changing. And I really like to have perspectives from people from across the world because while we're all in the cybersecurity journey together and we're all collectively helping each other, we face different perspectives and we get an interesting view as you see people operate in different geographies and across different verticals, because the challenges might be similar, but the way you approach them is always interesting to me. So with that in mind, I'm delighted today because the guest I have on today has been, he's a global CISO, because I say that global CISO word because he's demonstrated cybersecurity leadership at an executive level in multiple countries, which is always fascinating because there is so much you can learn from someone who's done this in multiple areas and across different geographies, because it takes a lot with different regulatory landscapes, different cultures, the way people approach security. I think it's always good to get that perspective. So the guest I have on, which without further ado is Michael Oberlaender. And Michael, welcome to the show. I also gave a very brief snippet about your global CISO experience, but I have to say Michael's written 2 books, and similar to the journey that I enjoy with book writing, it's such a vital thing for us, Michael, because it allows us to channel our thoughts, share all the experiences that we've learned over these years, and put them in a succinct format that people can benefit from. So I think there is that aspect of giving back, which I really enjoyed writing my books. And I'm sure you would too, but we'll talk a lot more about it. But firstly, welcome again to the show. And thank you so much for the time you've given us. I know you're currently in Houston, in the States. So thank you for meeting with me at this evening hour for you. It's still day for me. So welcome.
Hi, Chirag. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, and I look really forward to that discussion.
Likewise. So, Michael, maybe we start with first you have an extensive experience, right? You held the CISO role multiple times, multiple countries. Let's start about your journey. Give the audience a little bit about your experience coming from you, and then how did you get into the authorship journey? You wrote 2 books. What is the driver behind that? And we'll get more into it. So maybe we can start off with your experience.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for asking. So I'm a dual citizen. I was actually born in the States. Guess what? Where, right? San Francisco. And I had German parents, so I grew up in Germany. That is where my accent is still from, and I will probably keep that forever. And grown up there, did a Master's of Science with an elite university. Heidelberg is one of the oldest and most famous there. And have done computers since my early childhood, right? My first computer I had at the age of 9, and then later grown up with that. Nowadays, it's normal. My kids have computers, of course, in that age. But at that time, I was a geek, right? Clearly. And I have started my career besides study. I have self-funded my study with software development, programming, mid-sized companies, built the whole ERP system, right? With a then very modern language, 4GL. And then over the years, did more software development after the study, did stuff in the real estate and then in the payroll and other such smaller companies, mid-sized companies. And then I went into cybersecurity full-time around about 1999 with a large European company, actually a global company, but it was focused in Europe. Cisco, it's the largest food and sugar manufacturer back there, and also bioethanols in Brazil and so forth. And I was responsible as their, at that time, the title CISO didn't exist, but as their security person, right? Reporting to the CIO, reporting to the necessary folks, and making the culture work and doing the technology work, like the first internet binding that was really secure, upgraded all the things that were there, high load balanced firewalling and multi-zone gateways there. And all that technology is still in place today. I'm really proud of that. After 20, 25 years, it's still there and no breaches, right? So really good stuff. And I can say I wanted to focus on an international career. So after around about 5-6 years, I checked it out and the company at that time did not have US subsidiaries. And with my dual citizenship background, I wanted, and I was basically poised to come to the States. So I found a company, Heidelberger Druckmaschinen AG. It's a printing press manufacturer, and they had a large US subsidiary in Atlanta, Georgia. And so that was the deal. They basically bring me on board. I secure them as I did with Cisco, and can then come to the States and have an opportunity here. So really secured that. It was called Global IT Security Manager. I was actually introduced within the IT organization as our CSO, right? So that is how the things have evolved over time. And then secured that company, wrote the policies and the structures and the awareness material and technology stuff, hardening the servers, hardening systems. And then after 2 years, I moved on to a company that brought me down to Houston, FMC Technologies, the company in the oilfield services industry. And I was the first ever CISO there. And for me, it was the first formal CISO title, but I did 2 times before the role. It just was not with that title, right? Did this for 2.5+ years and really secured the company, brought a lot of new things in there, award-winning awareness program. All the engineers love the things. We put like mascots on the screens and comics and so forth to entertain them and make it really palatable and enjoyable with a positive spirit. Managed a huge breach there back then and also helped the company to survive, right? It was really critical. And I don't want to go too much into the details. I published that in my book in a very shielded fashion so that we can protect all the necessary things. But have experience in how to manage data breaches around the world in global exposures, right? So that's important to have as a CISO. And I then after the time, I went to another company back in Europe, Cable Deutschland, the largest cable network provider in Germany and / in Europe, and was the chief security officer, including everything like IT, information security, cyber security, people and physical security. So the whole shebang from a security perspective, and bringing that company really up to par and matured the security posture from, I won't say rough about 0. whatever to 3.4, something like that. And that was a major undertaking. And I'm really proud of the accomplishments there. Built a team, led the necessary projects, got the budgets, got the necessary approvals from the board, created a steering board with all the C-suite executives in there. So really exemplary how to do it and leverage that, right? What I had learned before and then practiced it there again and brought the company really into a very solid state. And actually, I was also there from a telecommunications law in Germany. There is a so-called telecommunications security officer. I had that title, right? I was really responsible, and I was to respond and report to the so-called Bundesnetzagentur. That means the Federal Agency for Network Control. And they mentioned when I left, it's sad that you leave because you have really made it a secure place, and it wasn't that before you were there, right? So a great story. Then I went back to the States and I worked for the first year for an Australian company, Worley Parsons. It's for you on your side on the globe, very famous. It's basically engineering and EPC company. And I did strategy and architecture, including security, but more focused on strategy and architecture for the whole IT organization, like CIO work. And did this for a good year and then moved on because the company reshuffled and had some downsizings because of the end of the mining boom that you had there in Australia. Reshuffled their plans, and then I went to Cisco Systems. I had actually published my first book, and you mentioned that earlier. So I showed in the camera, right? This is, I'm not sure if it can be read, but it's the CISO and Know What. That was my first book that I published back then in 2013. Really highly appreciated by other CISOs around the world, got recommendations and really hammered it because at that time there was not enough knowledge transfer, right? People were just not aware, how do I do a CISO job? And then Cisco Systems approached me and said, hey, we are interested. You are hitting the nail there on the head with this security by design. So would you like to join? And yeah, I did this. So took a job for Cisco for another year, was more consulting, but helped large global Fortune 50 companies to secure their assets and what the program should entail. And then I joined another company called the Men's Warehouse. It's the largest and very famous men's suit store here in the US. And then later that transferred into a name, Tailored Brands, and was the global CISO for them and built everything, policies and the necessary standards and technology tools. I basically six-tupled the team size. And when I came, there were 2 people plus a manager. And then I had roughly 14, 15, 16 people when I left the company, right? So and then after that, I joined another company. At that time, it was called JDA Software. They later changed the name into Blue Yonder. Was their global CISO. And I had to really build an enterprise function. There were multiple departments doing some sort of security, but it wasn't that integrated. It wasn't really talking to each other. And I really shuffled that and changed that and really formed a cohesive and really integrated security organization. Really proud of that, and did a lot of improvements, both on the organization side, on the process side, and also technology world, and upgraded the maturity curve there significantly and introduced new concepts and so forth. And then most recently, I worked for a company at the beginning called LogMeIn. They later changed the company name, actually in two split companies, one GoTo Technologies, the other LastPass, and I was focusing on the GoTo side and was the global CISO there, and have also helped build a situation that was critical when I came on board. There was lack of resources. People had left and right, or were on the way out to the door, and I had to stop the bleeding, build a new leadership team, rehire the resources, and that against the market trend, because everyone wants to hire security people, right? It's really tough to find folks, and then build the knowledge, build the skill set, and then quickly got certain projects and really fought for the resources and making sure this is really the right things to do, like a star project where we rolled out EDR solutions, and not only rolled it out, but actually at the highest level of protection, so that we do not have ransomware attacks or other such things, and MFA, multi-factor authentication, and implementing that and enforcing that across the company, and other such things, right? So really a lot of work and successes there. And then dealing also with some incidents and breaches was a lot of work to clean that up. And then most recently, I have left the company, and I'm now looking for new opportunities. I really want to find such another CISO kind of role, or potentially a CIO role, depends what the company opportunities are. But what I did in around about 2020, I published a new book, a second one. That's an upgrade to the first, much thicker. So the first one is like a small pocket book, 100 pages, and you can read this in 1 or 2 afternoons, intentionally so that the CISO that is new in the chair really can quickly get the knowledge transfer done, and then is prepared to go into the very heavy C-suite level meetings, right? In the second one, I wanted to put actually the flesh to the bone, or to the skeleton, right? Really have the details and really explain what is going on. So the big one is the red one. I show it here into the camera. It's not easy to see it, but the Global CISO, right? It's really the strategy, tactics, and leadership, and how to successfully succeed in InfoSec and cybersecurity. So it's one that I have put my heart in, and a lot of knowledge transfer. I actually got that comment from other CISOs around the world. They said, hey, this is a complete knowledge transfer. This is for someone that has not done the job before and doesn't know how to do it, and really gives you step by step the necessary things to know. Like, it starts with an overview, what's going on internationally. It then goes into the legal framework things, like in Europe, you have GDPR. In China, you have the Chinese security law. You have here in the US around about 50 different state laws, and so forth. In Brazil, you have your own regime. In Australia and other countries, you have your own cybersecurity. So it gives you an overview and compares that. And then I go more into the situation, like what do the hackers do? What do they care for? What are the threat vectors and the threat types? I really have a categorization about all the different threat actors, so to speak, right? From nation states to companies, whatever, and hacking groups and criminals. And then I go more and more into aspects from that, understanding the current state, and then coming down to the point, hey, what do we do about it? How can we solve the problem? And then go into details. But I stop there and let you guide this further, what you want to see and what you would like to hear from me.
Look, it's always very fascinating, and especially in your case, it's good to get. I think it's also good for the audience to hear like the journey you've taken to come to where you are. Because for myself too, I think our journeys are important because they shape our experiences, they shape how we approach cybersecurity, and especially in this day and time where I think practitioners like yourself, and I feel that too, we've seen the industry change. To your point, the title CISO did not exist. The word cybersecurity did not exist. It was, IT security, information security, morphed into cyber very recently. So I think having that journey, and now you have an entire industry where you have different roles. It's not just for technical specialists. There are roles available for everyone to a degree, like as long as you are committed to the cause and trying to upskill yourself. So I think that's really good to know your story and the books. So if I think about the Global CISO, the more recent book that you wrote, when I wrote my latest book, it was 7 Rules to Become Exceptional at Cybersecurity. And one of the things, in fact, there are multiple things, but sounds like we had similar objectives in the sense of somebody should be able to take that, absorb that knowledge, and apply no matter which industry vertical, no matter which geography, because some lessons are universal. So maybe let's just pick on one area, right? The one area which is very passionate, as far as I'm concerned, is cybersecurity is a business issue, not a technology issue. And business engagement is such a vital aspect. And it's not just cyber awareness, right? It's not just telling people phishing is important and you got to be careful of suspicious links or password security. I think it's how do you materially tie cybersecurity goals, programs, initiatives to business objectives and articulate them in risk, because that's an area where it's such a vital thing that bridges a divide between the two worlds. When you talk risk and finances, you're speaking the business language. So I want to understand from your perspective and in your books, how have you approached this topic of business aligned cybersecurity?
Great question, Chirag. And I really am 100% behind what you just said. You are speaking my soul, right? What is in my mind. It's awesome. This is exactly true. So cybersecurity, although they all use that term, is actually not solved at the technology level. You cannot solve a business problem at the technology level. It's like putting a round peg through a square hole or vice versa. It's not working. You need, as a CISO, to really, and I say CISO, but you say CISO, it's both the same. But you need to really understand the business. You need to talk with business executives, with business functions, business lines, divisions, depending on what the company does, really understand the way how the company operates, how the company functions, what the company either produces or offers as a service or whatever they do. And that means you need to take the time to understand, go out in the fields, go into the whatever it is, factory, machine halls, or if it is coding, then talk with the developers and really understand how this works, right? Then understand the processes that make the company money, and really from soup to nuts. When you have, like when I worked in telecoms, there is a very famous model. It's called the Eton Model that really describes the processes. And then if you have that, you can say, okay, look, in this process, what are the systems that support that process so that it's really functioning well? And with that, you then have already something that you can leverage for your business impact analysis. What would it mean if this system fails? That process is broken. That means that amount of money is lost per day or per instance. And then you can accordingly, based on that risk, you can really make your design decisions where you put your money in, where you really focus on in the first and the second and the third round of your program, right? And the risk aspect that you mentioned is key to have a common language, a common understanding with the other people in the board, in the C-suite, to come to the point that you say, look, we cannot secure everything. It's impossible, at least not in a reasonable amount of time, and normally with not enough budget. That's always the same. So what we need to do is develop this business understanding, how the business functions, what the money is that goes through the organization, where are the critical points, and where are the assets. Let's call it the crown jewels. It's a common denominator, right? Where is the company data, or maybe the employee data, or maybe the customer data? How do we make sure that this is secure and as good as you can make it with this amount of money, with this amount of resources and this effort in that short time frame? How can we make it better? And that risk approach is really serving you well, because if you would dig in and say, look, I have to fix every loophole, impossible. You failed on day one, and you will not have the money. You will run out of funds immediately or just in a very short time frame, and you have not really accomplished something. But if you understand it from a risk perspective, you know, hey, the front door, I really have to close down. And yes, on the first floor, the windows and the back door, I have to close down as well. However, I may not have the absolute bunkered kind of security on the roof, right? So this is something for day 2 or day 3 or year 2, I should say, year 2 or year 3, not immediate. And that kind of risk approach has solved well. And there are very good formulated and easily and freely, in most cases, not always, freely available standards. Like the NIST has fantastic material in the 800 series. I think it's 830 or 837, and then there were some upgrades. There's also a full-blown ISO 30,000, 31,000 model and other such things. So there is enough material that you can leverage, and risk is pretty well known, understood. And it comes down to, hey, risk is likelihood times impact. So you basically understand how likely is it that something is to happen, and then what would be the impact if this happens. And I have always taught my folks, both in my blue and my red book and also in my jobs before, focus on the impact, because the likelihood is something that is just believing, and it depends on so many factors. You cannot do much about it, but the impact you can really understand well, based on what I just said with the Eton model, that you understand the business processes, you understand the money that the company makes per day in that process, you understand the process chain and the systems that support it. So I always advise, if you want a substantial number, focus on the impact side versus the likelihood, because the likelihood, you like an insurance, you have your actuarial tables, but it's not rocket science, it's not perfect science, right?
I think that's such a and this is why I love these conversations, because when I have conversations with my CISO peers, and it's always unique perspective. So I'll pick up on the perspective you just mentioned, and I completely, I think there is a lot of utility to what you mentioned, is the risk aspect of impact and likelihood. Now, what I've always suggested, and you brought this up, is you have a business and you think about the threats that are material to the business. Not every business has to face the same threat. Like, if you're an e-commerce company, denial of service on your public-facing assets can be devastating if it's on a Black Friday sale day, right? Whereas if you are a largely backroom operator, business to business, not massive web presence, denial of service on your website, not as big a deal for you, perhaps. So I think it depends what materiality is. But the controls is where it helps you articulate that, right? So NIST CSF, NIST cybersecurity framework, or other standards help you. I think where it gets interesting to me is what you mentioned. And this has always been a philosophical debate in terms of when you have key controls. Some people argue that, well, we can only control the likelihood. For example, having a well-configured a security parameter, which is an outdated concept, but a well-configured security parameter will reduce the likelihood, whereas I can't influence the impact. And you mentioned that actually you can do a lot about the impact, and I'm with you. I think you can do it on both the fronts. Is if you have, and in fact, in my book, I kind of talked about the bow tie diagram of, if you have a defensible cybersecurity program, if you have a tested incident recovery plan, if you have a good detection and response mechanism, you can actually materially impact the impact. So yeah. I really like your perspective there, because it's always a philosophical debate, and I feel more people need to understand that you can actually have a lot more control than we think we do. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now, one question I do want to ask you, and this is picking up on your point about global leadership, right, and the global CISO aspect. What in your career have you learned through that journey? Maybe one or two key takeaways of working in different geographies that now has shaped your thinking. Like, let's just speak on what is common across different countries that has worked for you, and where you've seen differences, maybe perhaps between Europe and Australia, or Australia or the States, where you actually had to adapt your way of thinking significantly to influence the outcome. So maybe let's start with a common, and then we'll go to the differentiator.
That's a great question. And give me 1 minute. I want just to reply for the previous point that you made about the impact, right? So think about business impact analysis. There's a reason for that. And I agree with you. If you have your incident response, your disaster recoverability, and actually your business continuity plan, then you can do a lot for the company to reduce the impact as much as possible. And that proactiveness is the key point, right? But we agree. We are completely in alignment there. Now, to your other question, yes, I can say I have, of course, and luckily, thankfully so, I must say, I have matured myself over the years in that international exposure, and having talked and worked with people in different areas of the planet is absolutely a fantastic learning experience, and I don't want to miss it. And it's also a challenge, right? Because, as you said, people in different geographies, different countries have different societies, different backgrounds. They approach things differently. And as I said, I originate from Germany, so I am actually the typical, like a, whatever you want to say, the direct person. If you ask me a question, you get a direct answer, right? And it's not always in the most charming way, because I'm focused on the content. I'm focused on that. What is the problem? Let me solve the problem, and direct to the point. That is how I have learned it in university. Like a physicist, like I studied physics, right? A physicist really describing the problem and hitting the ball on the head, right? Just boom, boom, boom to solve it. Now, coming to the United States, where the culture is different, where you are not direct, you're actually beating around the bush, as they say here, right? So you have to be much smoother in the way how you say things to people. You need to find a common way how to make them comfortable, but also keep them curious, make them interested, and then bring the story across in spoon-fed way, right? In slow way and continuously pushing it forward. And I have learned this and I tried that out in different ways. Like, for example, the awareness programs I have adjusted here in this environment in a different way, how things come across, how you approach it, how you talk with people, how you educate them. If you do your awareness program, companies do it sometimes in the beginning, and then you join a company, and then some do it during the time. It's much better to do it regularly. Every quarter you should have some sort of cyber message. But the way how you shape the message, how you formulate it, how you leverage tools and whatever toys or stories is dependent on the organization, where it is, what people you want to reach, and not everyone is the same way, right? You talk to the C-suite in a different way than you do to the rank and file employees, and depending on the business you're in, you do a different message. But if you do that adaptation, if you do that kind of knowing your audience and knowing how to address it and getting feedback from them and then adjusting that further and pivot, that changes the game dramatically. And you can really, really improve the culture within a relatively short amount of period of time. Common things, because you asked about that, right? Common things are you need to solve the problem. You can't ignore it, right? So you need to find a way on every side of the different ocean, so to speak. How do you do the understanding of the risk? So risk management, risk assessments, risk posture, and then risk appetite. That's common. You can use that around the world in different ways. You can talk about what's the risk appetite. Are we cool with losing $1 million in a certain time frame? Whatever the level is, and then you can base it there. Another one that is common is about, of course, the technology, right? We all use the same technology. If it is TCP IP, is it cloud, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, whatever, it's all the same stuff. And also the same is the threats. But the way how you talk about that in certain situations, certain countries and so forth may differ, and then you need to adjust that, right? So what I'm trying to bring across is how you present the material, how you talk to the people, how you explain it, and what level, in what situation, that makes the difference and can break or fail or make your security program work well. But important is, in my view, a lessons learned, have a back channel. So not only present to your audience, but give them multiple ways. It does not need to be email, it can be Slack channel or any other such means, or Twitter account, whatever it may be, but have a mechanism and an opportunity for them to reach back out to you so that they can ask you questions and clarify. And in the beginning, there is this typical enthalpy mountain, right, where you have a lot of effort, but that's great. If you get to the point that the people see you not as the quote policeman or as the person that is pressing very hard on them and standing in their way all the time, but instead you become the trusted advisor, the trusted resource. Hey, they are there for us. They secure us. They ensure that we have a job tomorrow and the company is not bankrupt. So if you get to that point, then you have almost won the game. Then you have eliminated the problem in between and the communication barrier, and you can really focus on getting the things in control that you need to get in control.
No, I completely agree. And I think it's such an important point, the adjustment of the message based on the culture. And I think I'll take this even one step further. Like if you think of, and you've actually worked in OT type environments, so IT, operational technology, information technology. And I do think it's even applicable in that context, because I've held roles where, I'm in OT environments, and the way you communicate cybersecurity to folks in the fields, the engineers, is very different than you would do to your traditional corporate office workers, right? And the things that you take for granted, such as availability of a smartphone every single time at a site, well, that's not always the case. You show up wearing a suit and a tie may not always be the best way to, build bonds with folks in a different, who work in a very different environment, who think that, well, these guys have no understanding of what I do and why they're telling me how to do my job when it comes to doing it securely. So I think if you want to get the message across, you need to be trusted by them, and to be trusted, you need to adjust the message. So that's a very, very important point that you brought up there. And, cybersecurity awareness, which I think thankfully now we're talking about it much more than just traditional awareness. That executive engagement starts with you adjusting your message. So it's a very key point. The other thing I want to ask you there, Michael, picking on experience of leading teams. Like you obviously as a CISO, you led teams, you led programs, you mentored professionals. Always in our industry, because our industry now, cybersecurity industry, is very prominent, much more than it was 10 years back. The documentaries made about it, newspaper headlines, presidential debates talk about it. there is interest. People want to get into cybersecurity. So with you now, with your hat of a mentor, with a leader, what are the 2 or 3 tips that you would give to somebody who's looking to make a move into cybersecurity? Could be a graduate or could be a mid-career professional making a switch into cyber, lateral moves, or perhaps into a domain that is very new to them. What advice would you give them?
That's a great question. And I am a mentor. I have actually built not only numerous CISOs that are nowadays CISOs for large enterprises, but also train new people when they come on board and really explain to them what the challenges are. For those that are coming from university, I would say, look, don't spend too much money on getting all the certifications that I have meanwhile behind my name. This is built over the years, over the decades, right? Instead, pick one maybe and then focus on an area that really interests you. It can be coding like software development, or it can be infrastructure stuff. If you want to engineer something in the cloud, or if you want to do architecture, pick one and then become a really good person, a really good expert in that area, and then find ways how you focus on cybersecurity. And the security side will always be happy to work with people that have that deep knowledge in their area and then make them the security expert there. And over the years, you can then add more different areas that interest you. Maybe you want to pivot from, let's say, architecture more into application security, or vice versa. Or you want to do more operational stuff. You do incident response or so. That build knowledge will prepare you and help you to actually get into another role. Important is that you always be willing to do more than is required of you. Don't do the minimum work. Always be happy to go the extra mile. I want to say. I actually wrote this in my books to teach them that, right? And then from a leadership perspective, it's important to educate your team and give your team a visible path forward. What is my current situation? What do I see as challenge? Where do I see us in 3 years from now and 5 years from now? What needs to change, and maybe what people need to change their attitude or their situation, and then build with them allies and give them opportunities to grow. So give them stretch goals so that they can really reach that goal and then learn something by that, and then stretch a little bit further. And that is not to poke them or to punish them, but this is really in their best interest. The more they have done, the more they have learned and tried out, the better they are prepared for the future. And when the time has come that they are ready for a management or whatever leadership role, then you can promote them with that background story. And it's important from a mentor that you also adjust that, as I said earlier, for the companies. The same applies here. Not every person is the same kind of adversary. You need to figure out ways how you can convince them, guide them, and lead them into that future. And you need to assess a little bit the people, how they behave, how they think, how they operate, what motivates them, find their inner motivation, so to speak, and then you can build up on that and let them grow, right? And what I always say is, even in my leadership roles, I set up my teams for success. I set the long-term direction, the goals, and I give them the necessary tools and support from a resource perspective, but then I try to get out of their way. So I will not micromanage them. I think this is horrible if you do micromanagement. Unfortunately, that is a different culture. Here in the US, there is a lot of micromanagement happening at different levels, and I don't think that this is the right approach. You want to have people that are empowered, that are inspired, that you give the necessary support, and that they have they're not afraid of you. They have no fear, no anger. They know if they will hit the brick wall soon, they shall come to you. They shall let me know that before, so that I can stop that and help it and set it in the right direction. And if they wait until the stuff has hit the fan, then it's too late. But if they call me early or let me know this a week or 2 weeks or a month before, and they can already see there is something wrong, then I can engage and can help, right? And that's important to build this kind of trust relationship so that you can mentor and you can lead your teams and make them ready for the success story.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, vital tips for anyone, for all of us, right? I view this as applicable to us as to people looking to get into cybersecurity. I think how you can add value and how you can empower people is such a vital thing of leadership. It's not about, I think that becomes a more and more vital thing is when you move from an individual contributor, a great expert, into a leadership role, it stops becoming about you. It stops being about you shining and you developing. It's actually about you now letting other people do that and giving them the platform to do that and being there to guide them. In my career, I have benefited immensely from leaders who were patient with me who let me go out and do things, make mistakes and learn from them, as opposed to your point, just micromanaging and trying to control everything, because that's not a healthy environment. That's not how people learn. So completely agree there. So Michael,
and it's the team, right? It's sorry for interrupting. It's the team, right? So if you are a leader, you have to take care of the team. You need to make them successful, and that helps you and helps the organization to become successful. It's not, as you said, it's not about you. It's really about the team, about the people that you manage, that you lead, and they see that. If you lead by example, if you lead from the front lines, if you are not shy and really roll up your sleeves and show them how to do it and how things can be done, and then give them the empowerment and support to do it, this will build great trust relationships, and that will typically result in very good outcomes for the company, for the team overall.
Completely. And I think we got to appreciate the cross-generational leadership as well. Like every generation learns a bit differently, every age group. If you think about it, there is a change which you need to make. The younger generation might respond well to a certain type of, maybe a video messages, short bite size. A different generation might respond well to a structured compliance type training. And I think that way is also in leadership, right? On how you lead teams. So I think as leader, your responsibility increases more and more. And you need to become aligned to that mission, and it can't just be about you. That's what I emphasize. And it's a hard thing, right? If you come this far by becoming really good at your individual job, it is change in the mindset. So which is why great individual contributors may not be great leaders, and so vice versa. So I think it's important to recognize. So last question, Michael, you've been very, very generous with your time. So I really appreciate that. Last question I do want to ask you is, with your vantage point now, you're currently in the States. You obviously are very much, looped into the security community, the thought leadership area. As you see the next 2 years, I won't go beyond that because the world changes too fast. What do you think are, one or two things that you are keeping an eye on from a cybersecurity perspective as a trend? Could be a threat, could be an opportunity, could be a technology advancement or a human development. What are the two things that you are keeping an eye on and which you see where people need to think about that very closely in the next 2 years?
Great question. So I would think one is obvious, that's AI, right? Everyone is currently talking about ChatGPT, and I'm definitely on the same page. This is on one side, it's a big risk, and on the other side, it's a great opportunity. So that's definitely on my mind there. What I'm saying is, look, it's risky if companies don't have quickly policies in place, certain control points in place that actually, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying that developers start loading up intellectual property, so to speak, so source code into the ChatGPT to say, hey, make this program better, make it faster, make it more, maybe even more secure. This is a challenge, right? So you can't do that because the ownership of the data is then gone and so forth. It needs to be forbidden by policy. But you can, on the same token, you can leverage AI actually to improve things. And if you do that in the right way, so you, as the CISO, as your security team, you have to put always, this is not only for AI, this is for everything. You have to create guardrails that gives the company, the organization, the kind of guiding material. How do you approach this? And what do you need to think and consider before you do it? So you need to be very fast in getting these guardrails in place, and then give them an avenue, a road that they choose to take, which guides them in the right direction. If you can do that, if basically the secure route is faster than the insecure route, you have already won the battle, right? It's important to get this across. So AI is definitely a risk and an opportunity, and I think we need to do very fast and necessary policies in place, both from a regulator perspective as well as every company for themselves, where is their risk area, and then teaching the employees what to do, what not to do. And then on the benefit side, think about, hey, you can automate stuff like vulnerability management. And I have always said that vulnerability management is absolutely key, right, for AI. This can be automated and wonderfully solve that problem, and that regular patching and so forth. There's definitely opportunity. And another one that currently struck me is most recent. I don't know if you have heard this over in Australia because it affects the United States, but there is a regulatory issue. The SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, is currently issuing certain notes to a prior CISO in a company called SolarWinds. And I'm concerned, not because I can tell all the details that happened in SolarWinds. I've, of course, followed the media, but I'm concerned that the SEC is going for the wrong target. It cannot be that the CISOs, that the people that really try to make things better and really fight the right game, and they have oftentimes lack of support, lack of access to resources, no understanding at the board or C-suite, and they have to build that. that they are being held foremost accountable for that. That's not making sense. We are picking the wrong battle. What we should first do is create the necessary regulatory regime, make it very clear and transparent what the companies have to do, and then start at the top, because there is where the decision is made, right? And the CEO, the CFO, and so forth, they need to be first addressed. And then over time, you can break it down and see if a CISO or a security officer, whatever the title, is actually the person in charge that did it wrong. But in my experience, in the majority, like huge majority of cases, the CISO is one of the very few people in the C-suite that actually is having the security and the risk exposure in mind and tries to reduce that for a company. So this is on my mind currently because it just happened recently. And then maybe another one about the future with people. So I see we have always talked about this issue that we have not enough resources in cybersecurity globally. We have, depending on the report that you may read, between 1 million, 2 million, 4 million people lacking in cybersecurity. And I see this is still an issue. That is, by the way, one of the core reasons why I wrote these books. I wanted to do my piece of it and train the next generation to prepare them. And when more people do that, and then great. But I see this as an issue as the global world. We need to give more education, more cybersecurity foundational training, not only like in a certain education like university with a security title or a security role, but actually if you learn to code, you should actually learn how to write it in a secure fashion. If you do software design, you need to understand how to do it in a secure fashion. And that is unfortunately still not happening. And that is concerning me. And we could change this as the globe. We could just teach our university teachers and professors and so forth, hey, just put another chapter in your teaching material, how to do it securely. And to give you an example, in my most recent company, and also before, I actually introduced certain vendors, and we made it mandatory for the developers, for the engineers, the software engineers, to take these classes that they learn quickly how to write secure code, because you have to stop the bleeding. You have to really cut off this continuous pipeline of additional problems, and then you fix them at the end, which 100 times more expensive than if you do it at the beginning, right? And this whole new concept of SecDevOps, I'm a big proponent, and I actually talk about it, how to do it in the book, in the red one, how to really make it right. That is on my mind, and I think there is a long way to go. And it's important that we bring this across to your community there, that really focus on SecDevOps, put security as design goal, put it very left, shift it to the far left. It's cheaper, it's better, it's more secure, it's more effective, it's more efficient. That's my story there.
I love it. And I think different points. I think the one on SecOps is really important, the DevSecOps. And I've always said when I'm training people, when I'm doing this, it's as much a human and a culture thing as the technology thing. It's not just putting a tool in there. You actually need to embed yourself. And the ideal is you don't have this point security checks where you have a pen test at the end of it, to your point, and it's so expensive and it comes to the same things. You got to train the developers, but you also got to understand their way of working and put security culture at the heart of a good DevSecOps program. It's not just about automation. It's also about, understanding of what's happening there. So very good point. I think the other point about SolarWinds that you brought up, is definitely a prominent discussion in the CISO community in Australia, and I am sure everywhere where people are paying attention, because the role of the CISO has materially evolved, and the responsibilities and dare I say, the risk of taking on that role now is becoming more and more prominent. And people I think there needs to be a real conversation about this, because we still see the CISO title, like people know what a CFO does. The CISO title is still very vague to people. In an organization, it could mean there's one person doing hands-on stuff, another organization of executive classic role. But if you have a CISO who's way down in the hierarchy, even with a title, and is not truly at the C-suite level, both in the incentives sense or in the reporting sense or in the influence sense, well, that's a problem. And I think that's why you're seeing a real burnout and mental health issues emerging in industry as well because of this. So I think it's a very important conversation, and maybe something which deserves 30 minutes of its own time at a different stage. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's definitely a very pertinent point of conversation. So, Michael, you've been very generous with your time again. I am so grateful for the chat we've had. We've covered so many different things, and I wanted this to be an organic chat, and I'm glad we had an organic chat because we went in areas where where we didn't really plan that this way. So I'm glad we did, and I thank you for your time. And I'm sure this is not the end of our conversation. We'll keep talking, and we might have you back on too. We can talk a bit more about the CISO, the current CISO role, and all the risks that come with it and the opportunities that come with it. So that'd be a good one. So thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate the time you've given us today.
Thank you, Chirag, for the opportunity. I really enjoyed wholeheartedly the whole conversation. And let me say, in my books, I have actually addressed the point about the reporting structure. I agree what you mentioned there. It was really a pleasure, and thanks for having me, and have a wonderful rest of your day over there in Australia.
Thank you very much.